What do I do? Whatever you want. You can have it the way you want. Okay. Yes, thanks. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you. Good work.
So welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us on this panel discussion. We will discuss a very, very controversial topic, religion. Religion is maybe often associated with extremism, radicalization, especially in those times. in Europe. But actually, we will explore in this panel discussion what can be the role of religion in civic, pro-democratic and human rights-oriented education. And actually, we have a fantastic panel of guest speakers from all over the world, and we will discover how their experience is bringing innovation in education and even in fostering democracy, human rights, the fight against discrimination. So I'm very glad to introduce you to the guest speakers of our panel. First, Professor William Cook, you are coming from the United States. You are a distinguished teaching professor of the State University of New York in Geneseo. And you have a very long teaching experience. You have lectured throughout the world. You are a specialist of Christianism, history of Christianity. And you are an author of 6 books, mostly about the Franciscan movement. And it's very interesting to know that you were also a candidate for the US Congress in 1998. So welcome, Professor Cook. Then we have, from the other side of the planet, from the Far East, a Buddhist monk, Sayadaw Usendita, who is from Burma. Burma, a very, very important region when it comes to human rights fights. And you are first of all an abbot of a monastery. It's the monastery called Asia Light in Pinolwin. It's in the Mandalay region. And you are the founder of the Asia Light Foundation, which is consisting of a network of orphanages for boys and girls, a clinic, a monastic education school, and preschool. And you are invited here in this panel discussion because you are leading, one of the leading monks engaging in the interfaith dialogue between Muslims and Buddhists in Burma. And you have been awarded the World Harmony Award by the Parliament of World Religions early this year in May, with 2 other Buddhist monks in recognition of your efforts to promote interfaith dialogue. So we are really happy to have you here. And then we have an Indian sister, Cyril Mooney, who has an Irish name because she was born in Irish. You were born in Ireland, but you are, I'm sure, also Indian in your heart. And you are in India since the 50s already. And you are the principal of the Loreto Day School in India.
Calcutta.
And you moved to Calcutta in the 70s. And you are very concerned about the inequalities in India. You launched several initiatives. You played a role especially in founding the Child in Need Institute, and you have developed a fantastic methodology to integrate children from different social backgrounds, different religions. And the project is so exciting that there is now an implementation in the Czech Republic. So it's really amazing. We are looking forward to hear about that. Thank you for being with us. And then Professor Rukiye Tinas, you are from Turkey, but you also teach in France. You are a teacher and a professor at the Osman Gazi University in Turkey. And you're a specialist of Turkish foreign policy, socio-economics, social politics of the Arab and Muslim world in general. And you are also lecturing in the Institut d'études politiques in Lyon, in France. And it will be very interesting to have your reaction to the experiences that we will share now with our panelists, and to have also your Turkish perspective and interpretation of what we will hear now. So thank you for being with us as well. So to start the debate, let's give the word to history and to the historian, Professor Cook.
Thank you.
To start with the first question, before going into your more practical experience, I would like to ask you why it is important to teach religion and the history of religion for a grown-up democracy. Why is it important to have that at schools, at universities, to teach the religious facts?
I guess the obvious answer is because if we do not teach religion and about religion, we're teaching a kind of lie. And it's important to say that. Let me give an example from the area in which I do research, which is the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Reformation. I can remember about 30 years ago assigning a biography of Martin Luther that was written in East Germany to a class I was teaching. And the argument of the book basically was that Martin Luther was a social reformer, true, educational reformer, true, all those sorts of things. He was even a kind of proto-Marxist, probably not true. But the main thing was it never mentioned the fact that he was a person of religion, a person of faith. Yeah. It's hard to understand Martin Luther if you don't know what motivates him. And I might add, because I was here in Prague doing research in the late 1960s on Jan Hus, the great religious figure and martyr and person whose statue is in Old Town Square here in Prague. And it was very interesting at the time because he too was seen as a nationalist because he emphasized the preaching in the Czech language, true. He was a great scholar, true. He was the rector of the university, the Charles University. He also died for his faith. And it's hard to leave that out and make any sense of what the Hussites were about or what the Lutherans are about or any other group. Because we all know, it's common sense, I think, that religion is a motivator and religion is a factor in the history of the world. And we simply can't wish it away or simply talk about it as if it doesn't exist. I asked someone earlier today, someone who is familiar with things in France, how do you teach the wars of religion in France? And the answer I basically got is, we leave out the religion part. Well, it's sort of hard to do because it assumes somehow or other that religion is at best a sort of cover-up for real motives. And if we believe that, we not only believe a lot of wrong things about the past, it's hard to make have an intelligible understanding of the past if you don't calculate that in. It's also, as we know, equally impossible to understand the present and dangerous in how much we might misunderstand the present. And that's true whether we're talking about various kinds of extreme religious expression. It's true whether we are trying to understand what motivated someone like Mother Teresa in India. A lot of things, but first and foremost, by golly, she was a Christian. And obviously, we see in her life the way she understood her faith and lived out and practiced her faith. If you leave out religion, Mother Teresa is just an interesting woman who dressed up like an Indian and did a lot of nice things. Mm-hmm.
So why do we leave out religion? This is a question because we can understand that in a totalitarian regime, in an authoritarian regime, we don't talk about religion because it's anti-regime. But why do we have that, for instance, in the United States? You could share with us your experience in the United States.
Of course. Talking about religion is hard. And I think very often people make the assumption that, well, whatever my political views are, I could teach political science reasonably objectively, or economics reasonably objectively, whether I'm an Adam Smith fan or a Keynes fan or whatever. But somehow or other, you can't trust people who have a religious belief to teach it with any objectivity at all, although there's the other side of it, which makes no sense to me, that if somebody has no religion, we can trust them to teach religion fairly. That's a fairly bizarre set of ideas if you think about it. And furthermore, because after all, in the United States, we have the separation of church and state, you say something other than simply naming a religion in a classroom in the 3rd grade, and little Johnny or Sally goes home and tells mom and dad, we were talking about God today in class. And I can guarantee you the principal is going to get a phone call the next day saying, why are you indoctrinating my child? And it's difficult because we know that sometimes explaining about religion seems to and sometimes does overlap into advocacy, whether it's intentional or not. We know those things happen. We know there are abuses of the freedom that encourages us to talk about things as they really are as opposed to how we would like them to be arranged. So it is difficult, and I think very often public school teachers, and in the United States, 90% of children go to public schools, so we're talking about primarily public schools here, that teachers are themselves not very well educated about how one deals with these sensitive subjects. Teaching chemistry is a breeze compared to teaching history in a certain way, because of the fact that there aren't many big controversies that are going to set off parents against a school board or a school. And so I think it's very important we sort of suck it up and admit this is a very difficult thing to do. There are dangers in it. There is a necessity for those who are responsible for the schools to make sure that things are being taught fairly and properly and openly. But nevertheless, to leave out religion because it's hard to talk about is, again, to teach a kind of lie. And it seems to me the last thing we want to do is teach a lie. And secondly, if we're going to understand the modern world, we need to understand how religion works as a factor socially and individually in the way the world functions. So to me, teaching about religion, that doesn't just mean explaining institutions or why there was a denominational division here, but it also means teaching about their holy books. It means about teaching their practices and whatever. If we don't do that, we simply aren't telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to our students.
And also for the citizenship, in order to be a good citizen, to understand what the media say, in order to be able to criticize what we hear from politicians, etc., you need a basic knowledge, right?
Indeed. I mean, I think that's the way we basically understand education in a democracy. What we're trying to do is provide a big toolbox of ways for students who are going to grow up to be citizens and participants to have as many ways as possible to understand the issues in their society, to try to understand the reasons people have for their actions, to try to be able to critically examine what people say in public about what they're doing. After all, if you know nothing about the Quran or the Bible, it is very hard to say, well, this person claims to be operating in a religious tradition, but I know a little bit about that religious tradition. I don't see that there. If you've not experienced the study of religion and religions in a classroom, you're unlikely to be able to get through what's sometimes the masquerade of religion and what sometimes is the real motivation from religion. And if you simply don't talk about religion in the schools, public and private, again, you remove a tool from the toolbox of citizens, and that is never a good thing to do, it seems to me.
And so finally, how do you assess the situation now in America in terms of religious education and the results in society?
I think it's not terribly good. And I say that not just because I'm a university professor. University professors always complain about grade school and high school teachers, because obviously we say they didn't prepare their students well enough so we can then take them on. I don't want to argue that, but I think that the way we train or educate, I don't even like the word train, a lot of our teachers is not particularly useful. I think a lot of our textbooks, I will give a widely cited example in American history textbook. In November, we have a holiday of Thanksgiving, and it's a holiday that commemorates a banquet between Native Americans and the Pilgrims in 1621 in Massachusetts. And it's called Thanksgiving. Guess who the Pilgrims gave thanks to? That would be basically God. You would never find that in an American high school textbook. You would never find that this was something that was done out of a religious conviction to thank God for the friendship of the Indians and the food they brought and a harvest. That is, again, to denigrate, in some ways, the record, and it's also a way of not trusting, perhaps, the teachers. It's not trusting the judgment of families and so on to deal with delicate, difficult, potentially controversial knowledge. That's the only kind that's really interesting, after all. Anybody can learn facts, but facts don't prepare you for citizenship. Critical skills prepare you for citizenship, and one of those critical skills is understanding what motivates people and movements, and one of the answers to that question some of the time is religion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Professor Cook. So this is an example from a very old democracy, the United States. Now we will move to a very young and building up democracy, Burma. Hussein Dita, could you first describe us the situation in Burma, in your country, in terms of educational system, but maybe you could also mention discrimination or the situation of minorities and education.
မြန်မာပြည်ရဲ့လက်ရှိအခြေအနေကတော့ရွက်ကောက်ပွဲနီးကပ်နေတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်တော်တော်လှုပ်လှုပ်ရှားရှားဖြစ်နေပါတယ်နောက်တစ်ခုဗမာပြည်မှာအံ့ဩစရာကောင်းပါတယ်2010ရွက်ကောက်ပွဲမတိုင်ခင်လောက်မှလည်းပဲနာဂစ်မုန်တိုင်းပေါ်ခဲ့ပါတယ်အခု2015ရွက်ကောက်ပွဲမှာတော့မြန်မာပြည်တိုင်းနဲ့ခရိုင်14ခုရှိတဲ့ထဲက12ခုဟာရေဘေးအကြီးအကျယ်ဖြစ်တဲ့အခြေအနေနဲ့ကြုံနေပါတယ်
Burma is expecting general elections very soon, so it's I must say that it's a very exciting time for us in Burma. And another interesting fact that before 2010 elections, we faced cyclone Nargis that affected almost the whole country, and now, unfortunately, we also face the. Now we are also facing the impacts of floods. 12 states out of 14 have been affected by floods, and we are now taking care of the flood victims.
ပညာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်လို့ကတော့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံကအင်မတန်ကိုအားနည်းနေပါတယ်ပညာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်လို့နောက်ကျနေပါတယ်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့ပညာရေးဟာမေကွန်းတင်အဖြေတင်ပြီးတော့အမှတ်နဲ့အတန်းတက်တဲ့ပညာရေးစနစ်ပါဒီတဲ့ပို့ပြီးတော့တွေးနိုင်တဲ့ပညာရေးမျိုးထိမရောက်သေးပါဘူး
The educational system in Burma is very poor. Our children learn they learn all by heart. They learn by heart questions and answers. They are graded according to the answers, and they are not properly trained to have a critical thinking.
ပညာရေးဟာအမတန်အားနည်းတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မို့မြန်မာပြည်မှာရှိကြတဲ့ဘုန်းတော်ကြီးတွေကဒီပညာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဘုန်းတော်ကြီးတင်ပညာရေးကျောင်းပေါင်း1500ကျော်လောက်ဖွင့်လှစ်ပြီးတော့လူထုရဲ့လိုအပ်တဲ့ပညာရေးကိုဘုန်းကြီးတွေကတာဝန်ယူဆောင်ရွက်ပေးနေပါတယ်
Additionally, we don't have enough schools in the country, so the monkhood is partly taking care of the education of our children. So in our country, more than 1,500 monastic schools exist, and lots of monks are involved in training children in not classical educational system.
ဘုန်းကြီးကိုယ်တိုင်လည်းပဲဘာကကြောင့်ကဆရာဆရာမတွေမြင့်တင်ဖို့ဆိုပြီးတော့ socially engaged monastic school ဆိုပြီးတော့ထူထောင်ပြီးတော့ရပ်ပေါင်း80ဆရာဆရာမတွေမှန်သင်တန်းပေးတဲ့သင်တန်းတွေကိုလည်းပဲဖွင့်ပြပြီးတော့ဆောင်ရွက်နေပါတယ်
I myself have been organizing trainings for the teachers in those schools. So under a name of Socially in Monastic Schools, I have organized trainings for those teachers to come and get properly trained.
မြန်မာပြည်ရဲ့ပညာရေးကအစိုးရကဆောင်ရွက်တာအစိုးရလုပ်နေတဲ့ပညာရေးကိုပြင်ဖို့ဆိုတာအမတန်ခဲရင်ပါတယ်ဘာဖြစ်လို့လဲနှစ်ပေါင်း50ကျော်60ဝန်းကျင်လောက်ရှင်သန်လာတဲ့သူတို့ရဲ့ပညာရေးကိုအထက်ကနေအောက်ဆုံးအခြေအနေထိပြင်ဖို့ဆိုတာအတော်ကိုမလွယ်တဲ့အနေအထားဖြစ်ပါတယ်
It is very difficult to reform the governmental educational system because this has been in practice over 50-60 years, and to make a proper reform, we need to start from scratch. ပြင်လို့ရမှာတော့ဘုန်းတော်ကြီးသင်ပညာရေးကျောင်းတွေဖြစ်လိမ့်မယ်လို့ယုံကြည်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မို့ဘ
ုန်းတော်တင်ပညာရေးကျောင်းတွေကိုအထူးအလေးပြုပြီးတော့ဘုန်းကြီးတို့ကတည်ခြင်းမှတ်သက်နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ပြောင်းလဲနေကြတာဖြစ်ပါတယ်
But the monastic schools are very much more flexible than the governmental system. So that's why we are trying to improve the teaching methods in monastic schools.
နောက်တစ်ခုကလည်းပဲအစိုးရကျောင်းတွေကကျောင်းသူကျောင်းသားတွေကိုအခက်မဲ့ပညာရေးသင်ဖို့ဆိုပြီးတော့ဆောင်ရွက်ထားပေမဲ့တကယ်ကြတော့ကျောင်းသားတွေနဲ့မိဘတွေရဲ့ခံစားနေရတဲ့အနေအထားကအဲ့လိုကျောင်းမှာကြတဲ့ကုန်ကြစိတ်မနိုင်လို့မဟုတ်ဘူးကလေးတွေမှာကျောင်းထဲကနေပြီးတော့သင်လို့တက်လာတဲ့အခြေအနေမရှိတဲ့ခါကျတော့ကျူရှင်ယူရတယ်ဘော်ရာထားရတယ်အဲ့ဒီအနေထားတွေနဲ့ကလေးတွေရောကျောင်းသားမိဘတွေပါဝန်တို့ဝန်ပိုးကြီးတစ်ခုဖြစ်နေတာကိုဘုန်းကြီးတို့တွေ့ရပါတယ်
Although the official educational system, the governmental education system is free of charge, but in reality, the parents have to cover all the expenses, and the education at school is not sufficient. So the children are forced to take extra tuitions or send their children to boarding schools where they can get extra trainings. So these increase expenses of parents.
အဲ့ဒါလို့ကျူရှင်တွေဘော်ရာတွေထားမှအောင်ရတဲ့ကလေးတွေအတွက်မိဘတွေအတွက်ဖြည့်ဆည်းပေးဖို့ဆိုတဲ့နေရာမှာဒီဘုန်းတော်ကြီးသင်ပညာရေးကျောင်းတွေကမဖြစ်မနေလိုအပ်နေတာပါ
So these monastic schools, in fact, are a way how to relieve this kind of burden for parents. အဲ့တော့မြန်မာပြည်ရဲ့ပညာရေးနဲ့ပြောမယ်ဆိုရင်တော့ဒီလောက်နဲ့နားလည်လောက်မယ်ထင်ပါတယ် So I think that just very briefly about the education system in Burma, and that you can guess how desperate it is. ဘုန်းကြီးကပြောချင်တာပေါ့လူတော်ဖြစ်ဖို့ဆိုရင်တော့ပညာရေးဟာမဖြစ်မနေသင်ရမှာပါဒါပေမဲ့ပညာတတ်တိုင်းလူကောင်းမဖြစ်ပါဘူးလူကောင်းဖြစ်ဖို့ဆိုရင်တော့ဘာသာရေးဟာမဖြစ်မနေသင်ကိုသင်ရပါလိမ့်မယ် So every good citizen needs to have a good education, but it doesn't mean that all scholars can be good citizens. They need to also have good behaviors, and thanks to their religious values, I think that this helps a lot. ဘာသာရေးနဲ့ဝေးတဲ့ပညာရေးတွေကိုဘလောက်ကန်းကုန်အောင်တတ်ထားတဲ့လူဖြစ်ပြီလေအဲ့ဒီလူဟာအင်ဂျင်ကောင်းတဲ့လေကြီးတစည်းလိုပဲပြိမပါပဲမောင်းနေရတယ်လို့တနေ့တစ်ချိန်မှာဒုက္ခဖြစ်လာလိမ့်မယ်လို့ဘုန်းကြီးကတော့မြင်ပါတယ် So the religious values also play a role how to make control mechanisms like a kind of for the society. So that's why I think that it is also important to understand why the religious plays a good important role in the society's kind of like behavior. တခုတော့ရှိတာပေါ့ဘာသာရေးသိညာတဲ့ဘာသာရေးခေါင်းဆောင်တွေနေနေရတယ်လူတွေကိုမိုင်းတစ်ခုအဖြစ်နေနဲ့မသိမိဘူးတော့အရေးကြီးတာပေါ့ Of course, at the same time, it is very important that the religious leaders also should not influence the believers to become an extreme believers. ဘာသာရေးဆိုတာဘယ်ဘာသာရေးကမှလူတစ်ယောက်ကိုဆိုးအောင်လုပ်ပေးတာမဟုတ်ပါဘူးသင်ပြပေးတဲ့ပုံကိုယ်တွေကလွယ်မမသင်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မို့အဲ့ဒီလူတွေကလူဆိုးတွေဖြစ်ကုန်ကြတာအချမ်းဖက်တဲ့လုပ်ငန်းတွေလုပ်ကုန်ကြတာ No religion is in favor of violence, but unfortunately, some religious teachers may not lead the believers in a right way, and that could lead to extreme behavior. ဘာသာရေးတင်ကြတဲ့ပုံကိုယ်တွေမှာတတိထားစရာချက်တွေအများကြီးရှိပါတယ် ဘာသာရေးသင်တဲ့အခါမှာနှလုံးသားထဲမှာတကယ်ကို
ဓမ္မကိုဆက်ရောက်အောင်ထိသင်ပေးဖို့လိုအပ်ပါတယ်ဓမ္မကိုနှလုံးသားထဲဆက်ရောက်အောင်မသင်နိုင်ခဲ့ဘူးစကားလုံးနေတာသင်ခဲ့မယ်ဆိုရင်တော့သူ့ဘာသာငါဘာသာအစွဲတွေကြီးဖို့ရာကလွှဲရင်တခြားဘာမှအကျိုးများသွားမှာမဟုတ်ပါဘူး
The religious teachers need to find the meaning of the teaching, the religious teaching. In Buddhism, it's Dhamma. It's not only about teaching the words, but also understanding how you understand that meaning.
ဗုဒ္ဓဘာသာမှာသင်နည်း၃မျိုးရှိပါတယ်ကျင့်နည်းလေပြောလို့လည်းရပါတယ်နံပါတ်1ကဓမ္မကိုသင်ယူရမယ်နံပါတ်2ကသင်ယူထားတဲ့ဓမ္မကိုလက်တွေ့အလုပ်လုပ်ရမယ်နံပါတ်3ကနှလုံးသားရဲ့ထိရောက်အောင်အလုပ်လုပ်ဖို့လိုပါလိမ့်မယ်
So in Buddhism we teach 3 ways how to learn Buddhism. First thing is to learn the words of Buddha's teaching, Dhamma, to learn to understand about it. And the second thing is to practice it. And third is to feel it in your heart.
နှလုံးသားရဲ့ရောက်မလာတဲ့ဓမ္မအမှန်သမျှအပြောင်းလဲတွေဖြစ်နေမှာပါပဲ
So as long as your belief is not felt in your heart, it can bring a lot of challenges.
ဒါကြောင့်မို့ပညာရေးနဲ့ဘာသာရေးဟာတွဲလေတွဲရမှာပါဒါပေမဲ့တွဲတဲ့ဘာသာရေးသင်ကြားပေးတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေကလည်းမှန်မှန်ကန်ကန်နဲ့တကယ်ကိုဟုတ်လားသူတော်ကောင်းဖြစ်ဖို့ဒါမှမဟုတ်လူကောင်းဖြစ်ဖို့ဆိုတဲ့စိတ်တွေနဲ့သင်ပေးခဲ့မယ်ဆိုရင်ဟုတ်လားကဘာကြီးမှာဘာသာရေးကြောင့်ပြဿနာပေါ်စရာအကြောင်းမရှိဘူးလို့ဘုန်းကြီးကယုံကြည်ပါတယ်
So religion will be always associated with education, but we also need good teachers who lead us to a good direction, so that there will be no extreme behavior due to the beliefs.
And do you have also children from other denominations in your schools, like Muslim children? And how do you specifically engage in interfaith dialogue with maybe those children?
။ဘုန်းကြီးတို့ကျောင်းမှာဘာသာပေါင်းစုံလူမျိုးပေါင်းစုံဟုတ်လားတို့စာသင်ခွင့်လည်းရှိပါပညာသင်ခွင့်ရှိပါတယ်။အဲ့လိုသင်တဲ့အခါမှာလွတ်လွတ်လပ်လပ်စာကိုဝဲသင်ပါတယ်။ဘာသာတရားသင်မပေးပါဘူး။
So at our schools we accept all children regardless the religion or ethnic groups. When we train them or when they go to school, they learn the contents of the school topics only. They don't learn religion.
ဘုန်းကြီးကျောင်းမှာလည်းပဲဟိုသင်တန်းပေါင်းစုံပေါ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံထဲမှာရှိနေတဲ့သင်တန်းပေးကြတဲ့ဟုတ်လားသင်တန်းအားလုံးကိုလက်ခံပြီးတော့ပေးနေတဲ့နေရာကြီးဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်သင်တန်းစင်တာကြီးလည်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီမှာပါလာကြတဲ့လူမျိုးပေါင်းစုံဘာသာပေါင်းစုံကိုလည်းပဲဘုန်းကြီးစီမှာလက်ခံပါတယ်အားလုံးငြိမ်းငြိမ်းချမ်းချမ်းနဲ့လွတ်လွတ်လပ်လပ်နေထိုင်ခွင့်ကိုလည်းပေးပါတယ်
Apart from the school we are running, our place is also we also provide our space to all other civil society organizations who want to hold any kind of trainings, and these trainings or these meetings can be of different groups, different religious group or different ethnic groups. We as long as all these things are conducted in a peaceful manner, we have no problem to accept all of them.
ဘာသာပေါင်းစုံကလာတဲ့လူတွေကိုမြစ်ထက်ရခံတဲ့စကားလေးတော့အမြဲပြောလို့ရှိပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါကတော့ဒီကျောင်းထဲမှာရောက်လာလို့ရှိရင်မိမိတို့ဘာသာတရားရဝိပုဆုတောင်းခြင်းကိုဟုတ်လားပြုလုပ်ပေးခြင်းအပြင်ဘုန်းကြီးကိုကူညီပေးပါဆိုတဲ့စကားလေးပါပဲ
I always request all the participants or all partners who come to cooperate with us or who come to do any activities in our place, please pray in your belief for us. So by that way you will help us.
နောက်ပြီးတော့မင်းတို့ဘာသာတရားရဲ့သွန်သင်မှုတွေကိုလည်းပဲတိတိကျကျလိုက်နာကျင့်သုံးပေးကြပါအဲ့လိုကျင့်သုံးခြင်းအပြင်ဒုတဲ့တွေညီညွတ်ခြင်းကိုဟိုစီယုံစရာမလိုဘဲနဲ့ automatic ဖြစ်မဲ့ကိစ္စလို့ငါယုံကြည်ပါတယ်လို့ပြောပါတယ်
And I also request them that please do things as your religion teaches you. Be a good person who believes in your religion. By that way, we all will have no problem to solve, and we will have no barriers between us.
အဲ့တော့ဘုန်းကြီးနဲ့ဟိုတိုင်းရင်းသားတွေရောဘာသာပေါင်းစုံကလူတွေရောဟာမိသားစုလူဖြစ်ပါတချို့ဘာသာဝင်တွေကဆိုရင်ဘုန်းကြီးပေါ်မှာမိဘလူထားပြီးတော့ဗမာလူဆိုရင်အဖေလို့တောင်ခေါ်တဲ့ကလေးတွေဟိုတွေ့ကြရပါတယ်
I became for many of our co-workers kind of a parent. So some children even call me father because I play that kind of role to all of them.
ဘုန်းကြီးရဲ့တခြားလုပ်ငန်းတွေကတော့အများကြီးပေါ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာတော့ဗုဒ္ဓဘာသာဘုန်းကြီးတွေကအစိုးရမလုံနိုင်တဲ့ကိစ္စတွေအများကြီးလုပ်ရတာပါဘုန်းကြီးဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ပြုံးလင်မှာမသာပို့တဲ့လုပ်ငန်းထိဆောင်ရွက်ရတဲ့ဘုန်းကြီးပါ
My activities or our activities are endless. In Burma, monks had to replace the role of local authorities or local government. A lot of services that the local government doesn't provide, we have to do. So, for example, I myself am even funerals are taken care by my monastery.
ဘုန်းကြီးထူထောင်ထားတဲ့ပရိဒတ်အသင်းမှန်သမျှမှာဘာသာရေးလူကိုလုံးဝတက်ခွင့်မရှိပါဘူးဘုန်းကြီးကိုယ်တိုင်ဖွင့်ထားတဲ့ဆေးကမ်းမှာတောင်ဘုန်းကြီးဓာတ်ပုံကလွှဲရင်ဘာသာရေးသင်္ကေတထားခွင့်မပေးပါဘူး
But in our compound, all the things are conducted for the benefits of the population in our community. It's not the kind of I'm promoting only my belief. In our clinic, there is only my photo, a photo of myself, but there is no other religious signs promoted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Sandy. I will come back then to your witness, but I think already your spirit of peace is contaminating the whole audience. I can feel it. And also what you mentioned is also reminding us the origin of the European culture and the role that monks played in Europe 1,000 years ago. It was quite similar. They established schools and did a lot of education, and this is how our culture, started here in Europe. So it's a nice reminder for us. And now let's move to a neighbor country, a big country, India. And I will give the floor to Sister Mooney. First, with a general question on India, because not a lot of us know about the situation in the country. It's a very diverse country. It's a federal state with different languages, different religions. Could you just draw us the picture of that country in a few words?
Yes, it's a great country. It's also supposed to be the 5th most technologically advanced country in the world, with the largest number of children out of school. The last count, there were about 50 million children out of school. But then, of course, we've got this huge population of more than 1 billion people. And it keeps on propagating itself because nobody practices family planning, because there's no safety net for people. So when you get old, the only people to look after you will be your children. So have as many as possible. And also the way by which people have to live, because if you like, we have a pyramidal society. Maybe 1% at the top would have a way of life roughly equivalent to what you would have here or anywhere in Europe. In my school, I would have about 1,400 children. Very few children would have more than one car. We just compare it with situations in Europe or America. So poverty there is something which is endemic. It's something which we take for granted almost. And it's something which I found it very difficult to take for granted, because we do have the capacity to care for people, but we don't always utilize that capacity. mainly because the people who do have a bit of money are too busy surviving and trying to get a bit more. So we have many religions. In my school, I would have 1,400 children. I have Christians, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists. I don't think I have any Confucianist, and I don't have a Jew because they don't live at that part, and I don't have Parsis, but they are in the city. So you have this huge conglomerate of children. Every morning we have our assembly. I have 500 children from 10 years of age up to 17 or 18. We have our assembly, our prayer, our common prayer together. And each class takes a turn for the prayer. So one morning we may have a beautiful song from the Muslim tradition, or something from the Hindu tradition, something from the Christian tradition. But we have one unspoken and unwritten rule, and that is that whatever is given has to be of a general nature so that all of us can participate together. And we celebrate all our festivities. It's a wonderful place to be in school because you get lots of school holidays, because we celebrate every religious festival with a holiday from school. So from now until December, we will be celebrating very, very big puja days. That's for the Hindus. Then after that, we will have Guru Nanak's birthday, which is for the Sikhs. It's only one day. The Hindu pujas go quite a long time. And then we will have Eid. Eid will come, Muslims. And then we will have Christmas. So if you go into our primary school, you will find up on all the walls all the whole pantheon of all the Indian Hindu gods, something about Eid, then you'll have the crib and the baby Jesus for Christmas. Everywhere you'll have these celebrations going on. Children will bring in their particular sweets. Like at Christmas time, everybody will be asking me for Christmas cake. That's the speciality. And everybody enjoys everyone else's. And we have religious dissension only when it is politically motivated. And we are unfortunate to have at the moment people who have been voted in to the centre, the political party has been voted in, on its economic plank. It promised to bring the economy of India up to the top, and we would have been shining, India shining. It hasn't done that. All it has done is tried to bring in, but it has not succeeded in creating divisions among religions.
So you have shown us that actually religious diversity is a richness, and that you take advantage of that in your schools. Then there is the other thing in India. It's these huge inequalities that you mentioned, and you made a huge step in your life. You were initially a teacher in an elite school, right? You were teaching to children from the elite, and you decided to make a revolution. Can you tell us about that?
I continue to be the principal of that elite school, but it's no longer elite. It has 50% children from the well-off families who can afford to pay the fee, because we're an English medium school and government does not support English medium schools. So we have to collect enough fees to pay our teachers, and we have to pay our teachers at the level at which the government pays their teachers, which is quite high. And then on the other hand, we also have a mandate to care for the poor, because otherwise, as Christians, we have no, what should I say, we're not credible, because we preach a religion which you're supposed to treat your neighbours as yourself. I'm not saying that all Christians do that, but it's meant to be what a religion is all about. And if we go through all the religions of the world, I have a whole paper, which incidentally I got from America, where they have listed all the religions of the entire world, and every single one of them is teaching the same thing, and that is that you love your neighbour as yourself. And yet, in all those areas where these religions have been propagated, we're fighting each other.
And so you have created a kind of methodology to do this social mix in your classes. Could you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, when I took over in that particular school in 1979, I took over, it was a small school, 730 children, and 700 were from very well-off backgrounds, paying a fee, and the 30 were poor ones, and the 30 were all Christians. So I looked out beyond my gates and I saw this thousands of children on the streets, nobody bothered about them. And I said, how can I be here in India, having come from Ireland, and not do something for all these children who are blocked out? At that stage, that was a long time ago, 35 years, and nobody was bothered about these children. So then I said, let me start. I did a calculation, and I found that with the fees the well-off were paying, I could afford to take 50% of the others. So I began slowly, each time I did admissions, I took 50% of children from the poorest slum areas, but I took them on an equal footing. So they came to school along with the others. There are schools in India that run schools for poor children in the evening. The well-off ones come in the daytime. So I don't approve of that, so I mix them all together. And then, well, it just happened. We just kept on, I kept on mixing them. And since they came in at the age of 4, they were given their uniform so they looked like everybody else. They got a meal so that they were not hungry. So they just came up through the school together. And one particular day, I went into a class 5 class to find out why some had books and some hadn't. And one perky little thing said to me, you see, those of us who pay our fees in school, we don't have the books because the supply ran out in the shop. But those of us who are free in school get our books from the library, we all have our books. So I said, you're all 10, 11 years of age. Which of you is paying your fees? Who of you is, you know, are you earning the money? The all big eyes, no, we're not earning the money. So, therefore, you are living on the graciousness of someone else. You either have parents who pay your fees, or you have someone else who pay your fees. But you're all free. So you're all equal. There's no difference between you. So this kind of went right through the school. They took it with them. We're all free. We're all living on the graciousness of others. So I said, kneel down every night and thank God you've got a good school to go to and someone to pay your fees, and forget about your fees. So that is the whole ethos on which the school has been built. So no one thinks about fees. No one talks about background. But you love your neighbor as yourself. They're in front of you.
And the concept is so successful that there is now an attempt to introduce it in the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
Maybe, Linda, you could just say a word about it. What is your experience in the Czech Republic? Maybe we could have a microphone.
No.
Yeah, it's okay.
No, thank you. Well, I've met Sister Cyril about 8 years ago, and of course I was fascinated by everything that I saw in her school. And we have made a documentary about the work, and then we realized it's not really enough to make a film, because that's not even living up to the standards that the school is showing, which means, yes, talk about it, yes, show it, but then also go and do something. And that evolved in a few actions in the Czech Republic, which was a training, by now three trainings of teachers, headmasters, members of NGOs that are taking on the methodology. This is really universal and practical, and actually it doesn't have so much to do with religion, more of, in the case of Czech Republic, inclusion. And to me, or to us, it is the best, or one of the really great tools of how to make inclusion happen, really on the practical level. So it's a big buzzword, and there's a lot of inclusion happening in theory in the Czech Republic, but we thought that this is a way how to actually do it, and we are trying to continue in that.
Yeah, I should, yes, thank you very much. She made a film. Did you mention the film? Yeah. But actually, this multicultural, multi-religious mix that we have, we teach Christian doctrine to our Christians. To children of other faiths, we have a special subject which is called value education, which is something which has been ordered also by the government. They call it moral science. I've changed the name, and we call it now by value education. And for that, I have prepared the books right from the first class right up to the top of the school. So these books, about 2 million copies, have been sold all over India. And in that book, I developed a methodology by which the children would work in groups. And that's the methodology which Linda is talking about, and which we have found extremely effective. So it's a way by which not only can we teach our values, but we can also teach things like history, geography, and all the other subjects, and it works out well.
That's great. Thank you very much. So So here we have an example on how religion and a sister can bring in innovation in the educational system. So this is really amazing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if I can just add one more point,
Yeah.
and that is that religion in this situation, which teaches us to love our neighbours as ourselves, in a situation where you have a large number of well-off children and poor children mixing and being treated equally, I think that's the biggest example we can give to people about inclusion and about the importance of religion. Because if a religion teaches you to love your neighbour, then that's the best example we can give.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Ruki and Tinas, you have listened to all these witnesses and also experiences. What is your reaction, maybe from a Turkish perspective, maybe from the specialist from the Muslim world and the Middle East? Do you think that that education could be part of the solution, and maybe religion should be taught more in schools, universities?
I must say that Turkey is a very different case. It's a secular state, so the religion is under the control of the state since the founding of the Turkish Republic in 1923. The religious education was included in the educational program after a military coup. It was in 1980, and the principal reason was to counter communism. And since 1980, the Ministry of Education continued to teach a course that is entitled Religious Culture and Morality. In this course, teachers teach all of their religion in general, and Islam with all its schools, and the importance of the family, different values, their relationships with neighborhood, with relatives, tolerance, the living together, the love of country, and the holiness of the state. I think that religion in Turkey is instrumentalized, as we can see it, for example, countering communism, or countering all types of extremism. The teaching of this course was criticized, especially by the European Union. We know that Turkey wants to be a member of it. And if we talk about a secular state, it's not normal that a course like this one is obligatory for all citizens. But all the governments continue to defend it. It's necessary for them to teach this course. That's what I can say. If you have another question, I can respond.
And when you observe the rise of extremism and in the Muslim world, don't you think that education about religions could play a role to foster tolerance in the Muslim world?
That's what the government is doing today. In mosque, we hear sermons in which we talk about the importance of tolerance, living together. We know that there is a conflict between different ethnies, Kurds, Turks, or different religion, the Sunnis, Alevis. So the religious institution is very important to counter all type of extremism, not only religious but also ethnical.
Thank you very much. Professor Cook, so how can we maybe avoid the political instrumentalization by the state of religion? And also we could mention the civic religion that you mentioned in a discussion with me just before.
Sure. That's interesting questions. It seems to me that one of the ways we have to step back, I'm going to try to be indirect in answering the question. One of the ways we have to step back is ask what every nation does that controls an education system. That as a historian, you look back at the world and you say, a long time ago, at least in Europe and for most of the world, you had two basic kinds of governments. You had an empire, which everybody knew contained lots of different people with lots of different religions and languages and so on and so forth. And then you had much smaller units like city-states. And they were pretty homogeneous. Well, ultimately, in the West, long after the fall of the Roman Empire, the idea of the empire sort of disappeared. It didn't disappear on paper until 1806. But it really disappeared a long time before that. And what arose, and what's now become the norm for the world, is the nation-state. You've got a few leftover city-states, whether it's in the East like Singapore, or whether it's Monaco or Andorra or whatever, but basically we all live in nation-states. And if you look at the earliest documents that come from the formation of these nation-states, what they do is emphasize unity. We have this country we call France or England or whatever it is. And what does that mean? We're all Frenchmen. That means we speak the same language. We would say, this is sort of an anachronism, we have the same ethnicity. And in general, we have the same religion. In other words, it emphasized uniformity. Although we know from the very beginning there was no nation state that really conformed to that. Certainly not everybody in France was French in the ways that are thought about. There are Bretons, there were heretics from the Waldensians in the 12th century, and all the rest. And so, in a sense, this myth of the nation-state is based on a kind of falsehood, or at least it's only a partial description of reality. But as the world has divided into nation-states, many of them new, and not just in the developing world, but in Europe as well, one of the things you've rallied around is we are this people that has all of this heritage in common. We not only have the same flag, we have the same language and the same religion and the same song and all the rest of them. And therefore, in a lot of the education that takes place in public schools, it's all about, hooray for us, we're all the same. And, the images are of usually the majority group or the majority religion. France is traditionally Catholic, Spain is traditionally Catholic, Denmark is traditionally Protestant, or whatever it might be. And it seems to me what we need to do in our public schools and all education is to recognize that that old definition, the original definition of a nation state, wasn't true and is less true now and will continue to be less true as time goes on. And therefore, we have to accept and find a way to celebrate our nationality with plurality. It's okay that not everybody's Catholic. It's okay that not everybody speaks the same language within a nation. It's always been that way. In fact, we got to get the history right. And then we really ought to emphasize that. Then, in countries that are predominantly of one religion, it's still important to focus on other religions, not because they exist somewhere far away, but because they exist right here. I mean, large countries like India and the United States, I suppose everybody sort of knows is diverse in lots of ways. Although, if you would have gone to school when I did in the 1950s in the United States, you would know very little about black people. And all you would know about Native Americans is they kept losing battles, but they looked good because they wore feathers. And that's all you would know. And you would not know the contributions or even the current state of those folks and where they live and how they're related to the larger society. And the way we did it was in stages. In the 60s and 70s, all of our textbooks had lots of stuff about black people, but they were always in boxes, sort of set aside from the major story. We kept the main narrative, and then we sort of stuck these pieces in. And finally now, our textbooks actually have woven things together. And that there is an American story, not a white American story with, a black incident here, a Native American incident here, and so on. That's taken a long time to happen. And it seems to me, in general, that's what nations need to do, to recognize who they are, what they consist of, and make sure that the histories that they teach are inclusive rather than exclusive. And one part of that, one very important part of that, is religion. We've had Buddhists in the United States for a very long time. The largest Jewish city in the world is in the United States. And we can go on and on and on. If you want to get very good Arabic food, you can do that in Flint, Michigan, because there are a lot of Arabs who live there. and so on and so forth.
So what you are saying is that religion is not only important to understand our common past and culture, but also to understand our current world and maybe the world we want to build tomorrow together, because religion is also conveying universal values, independently from faith, a kind of ethics that can bring us together.
That's right, and let me tell you, I think how especially that works. When we read about religions in newspapers, whether they're in one area of the world or whatever, what we tend to focus on is clashes. That, you know, whether it's Protestants and Catholics or whatever it is. And if you look at the reality, I live in a small town of 6,000 people in the western part of the state of New York. And we have a lot of Italians and Irish who moved in. The Irish built the church first, the Catholic church first. When the Italians came, they wouldn't let them in, so the Italians built their church now. There's an old folks' home now, by the way. And of course, we have different kinds of Protestants and so on. And what you would tend to see, even if you just physically looked at the town, is differences. But the reality is very different, because in a small town, you don't have room for one of everything. And so we have a common Bible school in the summer because there aren't enough Catholics or enough Lutherans or enough Methodists to have one of their own. And in fact, if you look carefully at our society, you can read the headlines, which are largely about clashes, or you can look sort of at history from the bottom up and see how much, in fact, people cooperate. And not just Catholics and Protestants, but Christians and Muslims and Christians and Jews and many, many other religions, obviously, that are part of the United States. And this is true so many places. People have to live together, and they figure out ways to do it. This was true in the Middle Ages when Muslims swept into what's now Turkey, first the Seljuks and then the Ottomans. In fact, if you look at some of the documents that survived from sort of those border areas that went back and forth, they sold food to each other, they cooperated with each other because they had to. And there are models of how religions get along, but we don't necessarily focus on the microscope. We tend to look at the telescope. And if we, again, do history right, history has a lot of important and positive lessons to teach us, as well as a lot of things we want to avoid in the present.
Hussein Dita, would you like to react to what Professor Cook said, and maybe do you believe that religion and what you are doing will help Burma to develop into a democratic society very soon?
I personally think that it would be probably good to talk about all religions at school. That across the world we have different religions, and what are they all about? In our country, in Burma, where the majority population believes in Buddhism, of course, role of monks in the political changes, it's quite important. At the same time, we as monks have to be very cautious not to become a tool for any political party. We all should support the political reform or changes that bring benefits to the overall population and not only for the benefit of one party.
မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာတော့ဗုဒ္ဓဘာသာဘုန်းကြီးတို့များများကနိုင်ငံအရွေ့ကိုအားသွန်ခွန်ဆိုင်လုပ်နေတဲ့ဆောင်ရွက်နေတဲ့ဘုန်းကြီးတွေအများကြီးရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ကမ္ဘာအပြင်ဘက်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့အပြင်ဘက်မှာသတင်းထွက်နေတဲ့ကိစ္စမျိုးကတော့ရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့အဲ့လောက်ကြီးထိထွက်နေသလောက်အင်အားမကောင်းဘူးဆိုတာလေးကိုတော့ဘုန်းကြီးအနေနဲ့ဒီနေရာမှာအတိအလင်းပြောချင်ပါတယ်
We have many hardworking monks in the country, and they are really doing a lot of work to improve the social situation of our citizens or our people. I know that there are also bad news about Buddhist monks, what you hear outside the world, outside Burma, and I can tell you here that they are not that strong.
Thank you very much. So it's interesting to see that the Buddhism is so much engaged in reshaping the country, but careful of not being instrumentalized by the politics. So that is really a danger. Sister Mooney, it would be interesting that you share with us how you see Europe, because you are born in Europe. You have this long experience in India. It is said that it is the biggest democracy in the world. When you come back to Europe, when you see all the tensions now in Europe, also the cultural and religious tensions and the migrants coming to our shores, is there any message you would like to share with us?
Oh yes, I have many messages I would like to share with Europe. I come back to Europe occasionally to meet my family. And what strikes me there most of all, my own country, Ireland, where we were always, it was so impregnated with religion. Everyone went to Mass on Sundays and, you know, there was so much. It has become very, very secular now. And secular in the difference, in India, we are a secular nation, which means that we recognize and appreciate all religions and give freedom to all religions to propagate themselves and to live. And where God is very much part of our society in India. I go home now and people are almost ashamed of religion. I happened to visit that place in America which was knocked down, what's it called, 9/11 or whatever it is. And as I was standing there looking at, a man came up to me and said, "Would you pray for me?" And I put my hands on his head and I prayed over him and asked God to bless him and so on. And the sisters who were with me, the Loreto sisters, said, "How can you do that in public?" I said, "What's wrong with it? We do it all the time in India." So the message I would say to Europe is go back to your roots. Go back and see what, as my colleague here, I don't know, brother, what is he called, father or whatever he is. He is pointing out how the monks have made, and if you go back to the Middle Ages in Europe, it was the monks, it was the monasteries that kept literacy, kept the whole of education going. So I think it's important for us in Europe to begin to realize that now in our young people, they are being given everything they need. Long ago, people believed in God also as part of the fact that you depended on him. You didn't have everything at your fingertips. Nowadays, you don't need him. And that's the whole problem. And only when there's a big war in Europe or when there's another atomic cataclysm, then people will come back to God. I think we have lost God in Europe because we are far too comfortable. And for that I would pray, and I was asked many times in different schools in Europe, Australia also, have you any advice for our children? And I say yes, build a little bit of hardship into their lives. The kind of hardship that created the present generation of older people who had to suffer and struggle. And that's what made them tough and resilient and responsible. And I fear for our young generation, where everything is very, very easy on a material thing, but terribly, terribly, terribly difficult on a spiritual level. As we can see from the number of suicides that happen when children don't get what they want. And therefore I pray for everybody here present, and for all of us that we will somehow or other come back to God, because he's there all the time. That's my message.
So now let's open the floor for some questions from the audience. Maybe we take 2-3 questions, if we have a microphone. Very short, so no, let's say, analysis, comments, but just a question. We have just 5 minutes, so really.
Good evening, Mario Nicolini, from the Slovak team of the Parliament of the World's Religions. And we are working now hard to bring the Parliament not only to Bratislava, but also to Prague and Vienna in 2017. And I'm very encouraged by the panel, deeply touched. And perhaps could you address shortly the particular situation in countries in Europe which are usually have a dominant religion, and then interfaith, the problem of interfaith in these societies, one of them seems to be gaining the interest of the dominant religion in order to function actually. So have you encountered that, and how do you deal with that? You've provided a lot of encouraging experiences.
But you mean so minority religions towards majority religion in a country?
How do you justify basically interfaith to majority religions in countries where they are so dominant?
Okay. Thank you very much. And then maybe just a second question from the lady, and we will go back to the panel.
Hello, my name is Odessa Primus from the University of London. I'd like a question for Sil Mooney. I'm very inspired. It sounds like a wonderful school. I wonder how do the children understand that they have their own religion, but then somebody sitting next to them that has just as much belief in their own religion that's different? How can they understand that their own they believe in their own, but there's different for somebody else? And is it all a secondary question short? Does it happen because you have so many religions in one room, for example, that throughout the years in the school, they either become, one child may believe in more than one religion, or they expand their own belief through other religions, or perhaps that they become less religious and more knowledgeable about the religions because there's such a diversity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe Sister Mooney, you answer that question?
Yes,
first?
Actually, they are all extremely well rooted in their own religions. And it's very interesting in the sense that Hindus, Muslims, and so on, they pick up their religion very much from their parents, which is something which has not happened with Christianity, because we have so many priests and nuns and all the rest of it busy propagating. So that's one area. So they're very strong and very clear on their own religion. And somehow or other, they seem to be able to enjoy each other's religion. They know each other's. They know the various customs and everything else, but they're still very strongly rooted in their own. So it's very interesting to live there, and to live in a society where God is very, very, very prevalent. Nobody's ashamed of their religion, even when in the Hindu situation where a man loses his father, for example, he has to go for a certain length of time, I think a fortnight or a month. He wears only a dhoti and he wears just a thread. And he'll go to his office like that, and his head all shaved. And nobody will pass remarks. You could imagine it happening in Europe. So basically, I think there's a kind of sense that God is our Father, and we all go back to him by different paths. And unless, as I say, we're politically motivated, we don't fight. We just enjoy each other.
And maybe the second question, because we have, unfortunately, 3 minutes to close. Turkey could be a good example for this question of interfaith dialogue in the context of a majority religion. So obviously, Islam is the majority religion. There is even a revival in Turkey, who used to be a very, very laïc state. And we know that Christians are still discriminated in Turkey, although they are part of the native people. So how is it possible to encourage a society to engage in interfaith dialogue, although there is a majority religion?
the situation of Christians, Jews, are ruled by the Treaty of Lausanne. It's a very they have their own schools in Turkey. So when I talk about a religious course, it's only for Turkish citizens who are Muslim. It's not for non-Muslims.
But how can you encourage Turkish Muslims to engage in interfaith dialogue, which means staying Muslims but having a dialogue with people from a different religion, Turkish citizens who are Christians or Jews? How is it possible to motivate the citizens to be interested in that, in meeting another tradition, another religion?
I think that there is isolation. I'm not sure that there is a very good dialogue between Muslims and non-Muslims. They are living in their own how can I say?
Ghettos, maybe.
Yes. Speaking of dialogue, I'm not sure that it will be correct in Turkey.
Yeah. So still a long way to go.
But it doesn't mean that there is discrimination. It doesn't mean that Turks or Muslims don't want to live with non-Muslims. But there is isolation. They are living their religion in their part, and Muslims in their own part.
And just briefly, maybe in America, how are Muslims or Muslim citizens considered? And is a dialogue possible and fostered?
It is, and it is fostered to some extent. The other day I ran into a friend of mine who's an Anglican priest in the United States, and he said, I just heard from somebody that there are now more Muslims than there are Anglicans in the United States. And then just before that, I'd heard there are more Muslims than Presbyterians in the United States. And that's an extraordinary shock to most Americans, and most Americans wouldn't know that, but they certainly know the Muslim population is increasing, although for Americans right now, when they talk about immigration, they primarily think of immigration coming from Central America and Mexico. But I think there is dialogue, and one of the ways it works, for example, is if you've got a new group of Muslims in a community, they probably aren't able to build their own buildings. They're probably aren't able to build a mosque. And it's become fairly common in a lot of towns to invite Muslims to use a room that belongs to a church, not the church itself usually, probably that's good for both groups, but for, you know, the parish hall or whatever becomes a place where there are Friday prayers and whatever. And I think that although, again, there are millions of Muslims in the United States, they're not very well distributed in the sense that they're equally distributed everywhere. You're going to find a lot more in Michigan than you do in Arkansas, for example. But I think even where there are small numbers of Muslims, there is a certain kind of welcoming and a certain recognition, and this is a good thing about America, that we've always been a society of immigrants, and people have taken other people in, beginning with the Native Americans taking in those pilgrims in 1621. And I think it's fairly easy because we're used to diversity, and all we learn now is we have more diversity than before.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we have to close this fantastic panel discussion, but we've learned a lot. We've learned, I think, that religion is not necessarily the problem, but it can be part of the solution as well. And we have seen beautiful projects full of hope in India, in Burma, and we understood that it is necessary to include the teaching of religion in our curricula at school, at university, and it's a chance to rediscover our culture and maybe to build a world which is more tolerant and more global. So thank you very much for sharing with us your views. Thank you.
Thank you.